that really wonderful introduction. I've had a fabulous time here. I have really gotten so much. I've learned how to put on a microphone pin. It has been so lovely to interact with you all and learn from you all. And I wanted to thank you for the introduction, MECS, for the invitation for the lecture. And then as I was writing this, I realized that if I thanked everybody personally, the whole hour would be gone. And so here's a list of everyone I would like to thank, and if you're not on it, and I apologize, I just realized Clarissa and Tina should be on this as well, that if you're not on this list, my sincerest thanks and apologies, but I wanted to give a special thank you to Daniela Wenzloff, who is my research assistant and who did a lot of the work on habits for me. So thank you, and thank you all. Also, before I begin, I want to issue a warning. I've used the occasion of this talk, and as well as a talk I gave a few weeks ago at UCLA and at NYU, to write a new talk that gives you an overview of my new book project. And I hope to get some sort of draft done by May, so everybody who's interested in reading the book, there's a special writing group at the end of May. You can let me know if you want to join it, or better yet, let Amin know, and he will organize and coordinate. But I must tell you, it's impossible. It's impossible for me to actually give you an overview within an hour. So I fear that this hour will be grueling for both you and me. And as Jacob can attest to, welcome to Lunenburg, as well as Mercedes. It was lovely to see you in New York in your element. This will be a grueling hour, so be prepared. But I'm going to start as gently and broadly as possible. So Habitual New Media completes my trilogy on how computers emerged as mass media to end mass media. As mass media to end the very notion of the mass as a dense aggregate of things, that can appear or can be treated as the same, right? To end the mass by replacing the mass with the new, or more precisely, the endlessly renewed and renewing. To end mass media by replacing the mass with the we, by replacing the communal, the synchronous, the audience, the wonderfully silent masses that were constantly prodded and poked, that is sampled, but still wonderfully silent. And Wolfgang, where are you, Wolfgang? You gave a great presentation on the whole notion of the mass last week. To replace the mass with the you, with the chattering, trackable, always updating you, the asynchronous plural. So you and all of you all at once. So what I referred to last week as use value. In Habitual New Media, I argue, perhaps perversely, that new media matter most when they seem not to matter at all. When they've moved actually from the new to the habitual, the noteworthy to the barely visible. New media matter most when we no longer pay attention to them. So whether or not anyone still finds Google exciting, if you ever did, that moment of the first time you used a search engine, whether or not you find Google still exciting, it profoundly shapes our research methodologies. Whether or not you still look at your smartphone with awe. Smartphones increasingly structure the lives of we are the so-called owners, right? And sites that have long since disappeared, or we think that have disappeared, like Friendster. Remember Friendster.com? Friendster.com is still alive as a gaming site in South Asia, right? These sites live on through our habits, right? These media, they live on through our clicks. So repetition breeds expertise even as it breeds boredom. Repetition breeds both boredom and skill. One might say that repetition breeds skillful boredom. We are skillfully bored with our media, right? Through habits, we become versions, easily outdated versions of our machines. We click, we stream, update, capture, upload, share, grind, link, verify, map, save, trash, and troll. Right? At the same time, though, even as we become habituated to and inhabitants of new media undermines, new media seeks to undermine the very habits it needs to put in place to be successful in order to be new, right? So new media, in other words, can't survive if it's really new, if it's really wondrous for the first time. As many marketing studies have shown, and I don't know if they do this in Germany because I can still find everything in Edeka, but I only go to the gluten-free aisle, right? But in the US, in order to introduce new products, what grocery stores do is they redo the entire store, right? Because habituation actually dulls us to the environment. So habituation, the book argues, is both the dream and nightmare of new media, as is the new. So habituation and the new as the nightmare and dreams of new media, in particular new media companies. So the new in new media is thus a constant renewal. It's new as in once again renovated. It's the new as in the new world, a category error that reveals so much. And it's also a marketing strategy that thrives off crisis. Crisis become ordinary, right? So a crisis ordinary in which we update in order to remain almost the same, right? And so in this sense, hackers are the best things that ever happened to software companies, right? So now, out of fear of hackers, we willingly download newer versions of corporate spyware, right? So new media lives and dies by the update. Things no longer updated are things no longer used, or usable things no longer cared for. And here are some of the aphorisms of new media that structure the book. My favorite is, I never remember, we never forget. So new media habituates us to, tries to habituate us to change itself, to the constant acquisition of the new as renewed habits. Further, through the update, the new in new media transforms habits into addictions, right? So new media habituates us to habitual change. It makes us creatures of the update. To be clear, though, this book does not simply criticize or condemn new media. Right? A condemnation is too easy or too comforting. As I always tell my students, critique is not about finding that one thing that's wrong in that piece that you always hated, right? Critique is rather taking what you actually think is true, something you agree with, something you love, and finding its limitations and possibilities. And if anything, I love new media, right? So I'll end by considering the proliferation of note card videos, videos about bullying produced by mainly adolescents, videos that repeat, write, and engage templates to tell what should be singular stories, right? Singular stories about bullying and abuse. And these videos are not simply good or bad, but these videos make us ask, in addition to what does it mean to embrace a template, what does it mean to tell a singular story in such a repetitive way, they also make us ask, what does it mean to confess in a medium in which we're always confessing? Right? And I'll note that this last question, what does it mean to confess in a medium in which we're always confessing, why this voluntary exchange on top of surveillance is linked to a larger epistemology of outing. So from the epistemology of the closet to the epistemology of outing. Okay. So part one, link leak. So habitual new media began its life as imagined networks in, and this is really embarrassing, in 2006. So I gave my first talks about this topic in 2006 in New Delhi and in Cornell. And Imagined Networks was inspired by a very simple question. Why networks? Why now? Right? Why and how have networks become the defining concept of our epoch, right? Used to explain anything and everything new about our current era, from high-speed financial networks that provoke crises and erode national sovereignty, to networking sites like Facebook.com that transform the meaning of the word friend. Why, in other words, is this network map legitimately explaining but also representing all these different phenomena? Further, why is "it's a network" an adequate answer to anything, right? Why does "it's the network" explain anything? So back in 2006, I thought that the map, the trace, the ways that networks were imaged and imagined, the ways that networks are imaged and imagined to image and imagine the impossible, the unimaginable, from affect to global climate change, the ways in which networks were imaged and imagined was key to their explanatory power. Networks, to say the least, are very strange entities. So modern networks stem from structures built to resemble nets, such as highways, right? But networks have moved from planning tools and ideal technical structures. They've moved from future projections to actually existing human and inhuman entities, to presently existing phenomena that are empirically discovered, right? So systems biology infers the existence of networks in animals from the genetic to the multicellular. Ecology similarly conceptualizes food webs and less lethal animal interactions as networks. Right? The force of networks stems from how they figure connections and flows, how they spatialize the temporal, how they spatialize time, duration, by producing an image, a trace of the many myriad interactions around us. The explanatory power of networks, that is, stem from how they figure connection, from how they reduce interactions and agents to independent nodes and edges. A reduction that makes ephemeral contacts that fade and strengthen with time, contacts that generate agents into stable and spatial things. For what's common to all these networks, and importantly, networks are not used just to diagnose contagion, they're themselves contagious, right? So networks generate networks. Perhaps most perversely, the network's success is often measured by how many other networks it's generated, right? So there's this contagious logic to networks themselves. What's common to all these networks are the fundamental building blocks, the fundamental assumptions that in the end, everything is a node and an edge, so that everything can be reduced, however cartoonishly reduced to this, a map that spatializes the temporal, that represents the present by projecting a past and a future. Consider, for instance, how Traceroute works. And I apologize, we don't have internet here, so I had to go to MECS to do my real-time stuff. So this is a Traceroute tool, and this is from MECS, and this is the representation of how we got from MECS to Google. Apparently we're in the middle of America, folks. So Traceroute helps you diagnose networks by revealing the path that your packets are taking. Neat, but not quite. So this is the one the visualization gives you, which tells you that MECS is in the middle of America. Not quite Silicon Villa, but somewhere in America, right? To this. And this is the Traceroute command tool. So Traceroute works by sending out packets with different TTL lengths. So basically, in order to trace your packets, what it does is it sends out a packet and says it's going to die at one hop, and then the server is supposed to say we died here, and you keep increasing it until you figure out where the path of your data has gone. But if you think about it, given this sort of dynamic action to trace a route, what kind of trace, what kind of map is Traceroute, right? So this map, indeed all maps, right, besides those that are obviously science fiction, are arguably images of the historical present, right? So they're like novels that relay the past in present tense, right? This is what the networks do. They offer the past as if we were living it now, right? So networks maps oscillate between science fiction and historical present. So it struck me that the network, if it's anything, is everything outside the map, right? So if the network is anything, it's everything that's outside this cut in representation. For arguably, what's most interesting about networks, what makes networks networks, are the ways that networks leak. So as I argued last week, our machines work by leaking. So your network card reads in all data and then actively erases what's not directly addressed to it, which means that us in the CDC, we've downloaded everybody else's traffic, right? The only reason why we don't know about this is because our network cards, which always act promiscuously, are not literally in promiscuous mode, right? Your cell phone receives the same signal as mine. Your cell phone communicates with your microwave. Your signal are my noise, right? Our devices are wonderfully creepy. New media is wonderfully creepy, right? This is all hidden in this neat tracing, in these neat lines of connection, which deny the existence of crosstalk, of those wonderful generative effects of electromagnetic interference. And this leaking is not accidental, it's central. Without this leaking, there would be no communication, there would be no internet. And even seemingly sealed, even when your computer is seemingly sealed, not communicating, it still constantly leaks, right? They write to read, they read to write, they erase to keep going. Indeed, without this leaking, nothing would remain, at least not digitally. Because now, in order to remain, nothing remains, and so nothing remains even as everything does, right? Information is curiously undead, constantly regenerating, and we save things if we do by making the ephemeral endure, right? So we save things digitally if we do by perversely taking things that can actually remain for a while, like paper, right, and making them more ephemeral, right? More ephemeral and volatile, not simply because of physics, but also and more pressingly because of our constantly changing, manically upgrading software and hardware, because of our constantly changing and degrading machinic networks that ensure that things that remain cannot easily be read, right? Because of volatile networks that mean that we, some combination of us and our machines, must constantly migrate, regenerate, that is, care for anything we want to be, remain to be read, remain to be cared for. Perhaps this is why we do something that was at once considered impossible, at least in English, right? We store things in memory. We don't store memories or memory traces, right? We store things in memory. Memory has become storage. Connections have become lines. We destabilize to restabilize, forgetting the constant renewal that makes any kind of digital line storage possible. To understand the stabilization, the spatialization of the temporal, this contraction of duration and repetition, to understand this contraction of contact, of touching, caressing signals and bodies into nodes and edges, I began to think increasingly about habit, right? So what are these edges if not habits, right? If you think about the food web become network, right? If you think of the food web become network, it's not that fox in Yellowstone with tag 104 ate a rabbit, and there are too many rabbits to tag, right? It's rather that foxes habitually eat rabbits, right? Each line is a potential interaction based on repeated past interactions, right? Think of all those canonical examples of big data that have become ingrained in our minds, right? So you all know this one, right? So Target knew somebody was pregnant before her father did, right? Because apparently there are 7 or 8 vitamins that women who are pregnant buy before they tell other people, right? And one thing we should ask ourselves, why is it that we all know the same 5 examples about big data if big data is really big? Just putting it out there, right? So big data algorithms search for correlations, for habits that repeat across networks, that reduce the inextricable complexity of networks into proxies that scale and connect. Further, what is information if not habit, right? What is information if not habit? And here, I mean both the archaic meaning of information as the formation of individuals, right? So information meant to form things. It wasn't something that you delivered, right? So habit is training, habit as embodied training, right? And in this sense, if you think about it, wonderfully, what habit brings up, and this is in the neuroscience now, there is no memory. Forget there is no software. If you think about it rigorously in terms of perception, there is no memory. Right? Also, habit as the technical meaning of communication. Communication without meaning, communication that lies beneath meaning, that makes meaning possible through its repetition. So part 2, creatures of the update. So habits are strange, contradictory things. They're probably stranger even than networks, right? So habits are humanly made nature, right? They're practices acquired through time that are seemingly forgotten about as they move from the voluntary to the involuntary. And as they do so, they penetrate a person, a body, a series of bodies. Bodies in motion, bodies in contagion, bodies in contraction. So to outline quickly some of the contradictions that habits embody, and importantly, habits are about embodying. As Wendy Wood, a professor of psychology, neuroscience, and business, among others, has argued, habits are voluntary actions taken on initially to achieve a goal, which soon become autonomous. So neurologically speaking, according to images of the brain, and this opens another discussion which I'm not going to touch now, habits are behaviors that move from the associative to the sensory motor system. And once embedded, they operate independently, sort of cut off from both goals and rewards. And this is why they are, behaviorally speaking, so difficult to change, right? Because they're separate from both goals. But they, therefore, she argues, are vestiges of past goals pursued, right? So habits are vestiges of past goals pursued. At the same time, the involuntary nature of habit, the seemingly mechanical repetition, makes possible creativity and rational thought. As Liz Gross argues, habit is not regarded as that which reduces the human to the order of the mechanical, but rather as a fundamentally creative capacity that produces possibility of stability in a universe in which change is fundamental. So habit allows for stability, time and space to be creative. Without habit, there would be no creativity. Further, habit is itself creative, right? So habit, as David Hume nicely pointed out, can lie, right? It can bring up false correlations. Habit also comes to define individuals. As Merleau-Ponty argued, my own body is my own basic habit. We are habits, nothing but habits, the habit of saying I, according to Deleuze. And these were all really nicely analyzed by Claire Carlyle. And William James has argued that it's through habit that things come to fit our body. But at the same time, William James argued that it's also the enormous flywheel of society. It's what keeps people in their place. It's what keeps classes from mixing, right? It holds the miner in his darkness and nails the countryman to his log cabin and his lonely farm through all the months of snow, right? It keeps different social strata from mixing. Habit, in other words, is where the irrational lies. And interestingly, within economics, the field of economics that's challenging game theory, and in particular game theory's assumption that we're all rational agents, relies on habit. So this is where institutional economics is drawing from. So in this sense, habit would seem to be ideology in action, right? And if you think of Zizek's definition of ideology, we are fetishists in practice, not in theory. It's not a question of knowledge, but action, right? And in order to make this point, Zizek, of course, draws from this incredible quotation from Pascal as to how to become a believer, right? So you want to find faith and you don't know the road. Learn from those who were once bound like you and who now wager all they have. Follow the way they did by which they began. They behave just as if they did believe, taking holy water, having masses said, and so on. That will make you believe quite naturally and will make you more docile, right? So this highlights the fact that habits spread. They're how belief spreads. But habit is not limited to individual actors acting or repeating along, but it's also what communicates, right? Habits are things done by the environment by means of organic structures acquired or acquired dispositions. This is Dewey's famous definition of habits. So as Wendy Wood has argued, in other words, they're things that are cued by the environment. They open us to the environment. They're arguably forms of pre-social, pre-individual relation. At the same time, though, as they open us to the environment, they also dull us to the environment, right? So habituation dulls us to the new. They also link the non-human and the human. Allegedly, the same part of the brain, the basal ganglia, is the same both in fish and humans. So what should be clear then is that habit not only lies on both sides of the distinction, it also troubles all these distinctions, right? It brings out the creative in the machinic in the creative. They embed society in bodily reactions. Like a nun's habit, they mark an outer that becomes an inner, right? They switch between the voluntary and the involuntary. Because habits, however inflexible, however difficult to change, can be changed, right? They can, through crisis, move back from the back to the associative system from the motor system. And this is especially important in all the popular literature about habit. Popular literature, which is apparently the most popular literature out there according to Amazon. So Amazon actually tracks everything everybody highlights, and apparently the most highlighted texts are from books about the habits of the 7 most successful people, right? So, so Andreas, where are you, Andreas? You gave that early presentation. Oh, yes, Andreas, but also Andreas. You all have to get different first names. I know it's kind of, maybe this is how ideology works in Germany. You don't scream you scream Andreas, and then you get a million Andreases. I don't know. But back to your presentation on Kindle and how that operates, right? So as Duhigg has argued, habit is a loop, right? Habit is provoked by a cue and a reward. Once they become a habit, we anticipate the reward, and the loop is driven by craving. So we cannot, according to Duhigg, actually get rid of habits. We can only acquire new ones, right? So again, memory is storage. Memory is storage because memory is also perception. So who needs deconstruction if you have habits, right? Troubling every binary, unsettling every opposition. And what I find intriguing about habits is that it's in habits that deconstruction and vitalism meet each other and agree, right? So they hate each other otherwise, but somehow the habitual and that eruption is a moment of meeting. So habit, but it's really strange. So habit, which was devalued in the era of Taylorism, right? In which we were perhaps always perversely formulated as rational individual agents, is now resurging in the era of neoliberalism, in which we're all allegedly individuals, right? In which there is no society. So habit, this is my question. Is habit what society can be in an era in which, as Margaret Thatcher argued, there is no society? So habit, culture in an era in which there is no society. Right? Perhaps. But something very strange is happening to habit. Something very strange is happening in this cloak of a renewal of habit. And to make this point, let me quickly touch on Félix Révesson's 19th century description of habit. And everyone who goes back to habit goes back to Révesson. He's like the base of the philosophical renewal of habit. So habit for Révesson is central to being's tendency to persist. By persistence, however, he's not talking about sameness. He's not thinking about persistence as simply being there. Habit for him implies interval. Habit is not instinct. In habit, reaction does not equal an action. Potentiality does not equal actuality. So habit signals a change in disposition, a disposition towards change, in a being which itself does not change even as it does change, right? So masses which are uniform cannot have habits. So habit comes from a change, a reaction to a change, but remains beyond that change. So habit takes a change from the outside and makes that more and more a change from the inside. So through that action, receptivity turns into spontaneity. Habit is an unreflective spontaneity beneath personality and consciousness that breaks the passivity of the organism, that makes the subject and object, act, and goal coincide. So habit occurs when understanding becomes so strong it's no longer reflected, and action is so free it anticipates and escapes the will or consciousness, or when a being's repeated actions reduces the difference between the state of the sensed object and sense itself. So again, the subject and object desired are fused. So to make this clearer, let me just quickly go over the example of the moral person he gives you. So he says, at first you want to be moral. There is a difference between you and the state of morality. However, by practicing, by habituating yourself to becoming moral, gradually, without effortless, you become a moral person. And there's no difference between you and morality. Pity becomes charity. So through habit, he argues, we become independent of cue and reward. But habit now, in the way people are talking about it, especially in the popular press, habit is closer to addiction, right? And importantly, addiction in Roman law was a state in which you and your property was given to your creditor, right? So it's a state of dependency. Think again of Duhigg's loop, right? Habit here is anything but spontaneous, independent, or self-sustaining, right? The point of habit, in other words, the point of the resurgence of interest in habit is how to change habit. And Duhigg begins his book with the story of Lisa Allen, who's reached a moment of crisis. And what's important for Duhigg throughout the book is that crises are central to changing of habit. Because habit plus crisis equals update. Habit plus crisis equals update. So habit change happens according to almost all theories of habit, and on this they're all unified when there's conflict, when habits conflict, when there's a clear conflict between habits and goals. These moments of crisis are also moments of the critical. So Pierre Bourdieu argued that critical reason, reflective reason, is central to intervening into habit. And in crisis, importantly, affect and consciousness meet. It's a moment where affect and consciousness meet. This interest in habit to change them, to update them, to improve them is evident everywhere. Think of Peter Sloterdijk's book, You Must Improve Yourself. Think of big data. The point is to figure out certain correlations in order to accentuate them, to make you behave slightly differently. And this is also because, as I've argued extensively elsewhere, new media is a crisis machine. Crisis is new media's critical difference. And in new media, crisis has found its medium, and in crisis, new media has found its value, its punctuating device. So most briefly, and this is central to the book, crises are central to the notion of empowerment, to the small s empowerment that emerges from these constant modes of decision making. So the point is that habit is resurging at a time when habit is no longer habit, and what is habit, the comfort zone offered by habituation, is increasingly pathologized. Consider, for instance, the case of phantom vibrations. This is one that couldn't be downloaded. But you all know phantom vibrations, right? You know, you think your cell phone's vibrating and it ain't there, sweetheart, right? So the article I was going to show you is from the Wall Street Journal, calling us, everyone who has phantom vibrations, addicts. We're all addicted to our telephone. Right? How many of you have phantom vibrations? Yes, excellent. Okay. Now, if you consider the Reveyson, isn't this good? Right? Now we are spontaneously providing those sensations, so we no longer need the phone. Right? Subject and object coincide. We and the phone are connected. We satisfy ourselves, right? So why is this? Why is this rather than actually needing a phone to feel vibrations, count as addiction, right? Why are we pathologized precisely at the moment at which we're entirely habituated, at the moment that habit was supposed to bring us towards, right? Except that habit is now addiction and addiction habit. So in this era of the update, what might it mean to refuse this logic of the update, of virality? What might it mean to repeat differently, to occupy the template? So part 3, occupying templates. The logic of the update seems clear in the templates that dominate Web 2.0, right? So the web is being transformed pretty obviously into a series of poorly gated communities. That is a real vibration. That's really my phone. Okay. See, they interrupt. I was so much better with my phantom vibrations. So the web is being transformed into a series of poorly gated communities in which we become like carefully manicured homes that are slightly different, and that's our individuality, right? So our templates, what makes our templates different are our updates, and through those updates we become we become use value. Given this, what does it mean to deliberately choose a template? What does it mean to deliberately choose a template to reveal what's arguably the most singular or intimate about ourselves? So think of all those templates used to tell stories of sexual abuse. So this is Project Unbreakable. And these templates do not emerge naturally. They're carefully orchestrated. In fact, if you read these comments, this woman is really dogged. She contacts everyone who puts up an incorrect template and says, maybe you haven't understood, or can I please visit you and take a proper picture, right? They're carefully orchestrated. The examples, though, that I want to end with and think through are note card videos, the if you really knew me videos that document bullying. And usually abuse becomes self-abuse. And to give you a sense of these videos, I'm going to play 4 of these together. And I realize that the Amanda Todd one's a little long, but I want to give you a sense of their repetition and their difference. So if we could cut the lights, that would be great. So I'm just going to put this one on full screen while and just talk over it. So I've discussed the Amanda Todd video in the past in terms of slut shaming. The ways in which slut shaming is so prevalent because it blames users, it blames their promiscuity for the inherent leakiness of networks. Through slut shaming, the fundamental leakiness of vulnerability of networks, the promiscuity of our machines is elided, as if the fact that our machines leak is due to leaky users rather than leaky networks. And in these terms, I've tried to understand the Todd video as a shadowy presencing, as a loitering, as a way to engage the fundamental publicity of networks. For what's remarkable, of course, are the note cards, the darkened face, the hint at a profile. In this video, she reclaims her story and her exposure, her face shaded and partly cut off. The note cards are positioned strategically at chest level, right? The note cards carefully timed and positioned for emphasis. So we, the audience, are focused on the site of her initial exposure, but instead of seeing her breasts, we read her story. The note cards and her shadowy presence offer a shield and a shelter from which Todd voluntarily reveals her secret. And so at the end of the video, what she reveals is her name. My name is Amanda Todd. Now, this note card video has been taken as a suicide note, as a tragic video that signaled, foreshadowed her suicide. But importantly, in the post that accompanied this video, she said that it's anything but. She said she was struggling to keep in the world because everything touches me so deeply, but I'm putting this up to be a figure for others, to show that you can survive this. And for Todd, as her mother would later insist, this video documented her survival and her will to live. But in order to read it this way, we have to read it in relationship to all those other videos, right? That preceded hers, but in which hers in no way updates. Now, the status of these videos is odd, right? And now, given the prevalence of these videos, they're actually used. So this is the one that's usually shown. This is her post that says this is about her still being here. And now these videos are used as training exercises. So in middle schools, people are told to make note card videos as a way to understand teen suicide. So again, the question that it poses is, what does it mean to confess in a medium in which we're always confessing? What does it mean to reveal secrets, to out oneself in a medium in which we're always being outed? Why this voluntary exposure, especially around stories about bullying and self-harm? And why are these revelations of mainly open secrets framed and accepted as telling the truth about a person, and therefore also virulently attacked as fake? So Maurice in particular was attacked as false. He was the one who was bottom here because he posted another video in which he was happy, right? And so there was all this hate mail sent to him on the basis of this happy one, saying the other one was fake. So therefore the happy video has since been deleted, right? And I ask these questions because they're important and because we don't do justice to these videos if we merely judge them as authentic or false. If we merely read them, in other words, at the level of meaning, true or false. We don't do justice to them, and especially Todd's, if we don't see them as writing, as attempting to write something like community. After all, why write? Why use note cards? Why use such a strong and overriding template in order to reveal one's name, which is, after all, an open secret? What does it mean to occupy, to embrace such a template in this era of neoliberal empowerment and individualism? Not surprisingly, the template has also been central to the Occupy movement. And in the book, I think about these note card videos in relationship to DDoS attacks and flash mobs. These note cards relay singular stories in a form that denies absolute separateness, absolute individuality, by repeating the narrative form, the style, and even the content. They do so while also denying absolute separateness. At stake in these videos and these outings, these confessions, is a reaching towards community, a stretching that stems from what seems to be held in common but can never be, right? Singular experiences of abuse and vulnerability. This exposure, this repetition reveals that one is never alone. That exposure comes from a mutual touching, as Nancy argues, a mutual extension. What is exposed, as Nancy argues, touches another. It's impossible to figure out which is the first note card video, as though there could be a first message. For this reaching and desire for community is not simple. And indeed, we need to understand these moves towards something like community in relationship to the hate they also inspire. So here you see some of the insults put on the Amanda Todd video, these comments. And these comment sections are filled with hateful insults directed at even the dead Todd. And it's important to remember, as Sarah Ahmed has argued and reminds us, hate is a form of connection. Hate sustains its object through modes of attachment. Hate, a mode of connection that needs its object even when it's dead. And we miss everything about these videos if we miss this repetition in relationship to this as well. If we miss the need to repeat, to inhabit, to respond to this hatred by repeating, by occupying. And this is the point I'll end with, this writing reveals the extent to which communication is never simply about meaning. Reading the work of George Bataille, Nancy claims that writing ascribes, that is, ascribes meaning as much as it inscribes signification. Writing that uses meaning to strain against meaning, writing that exposes the writer is a cry, a plea, a response, a knowing nothing that is nonetheless crucial. So writing, a cry, a constantly repeated rewriting, a request, a demand, a plea. And this writing is oddly at the heart of networks that are touching us, that are caressing us, the signals that are touching and caressing us as we speak. Right? Networks whose signals perpetuate through exscription, right? Networks whose signals perpetuate through a constant copying that is about anything but meaning, but is a constant copying and a touching that enables communication, right? Networks enable us to communicate by exposing us, by making us vulnerable. And by making us vulnerable, they allow there to be an us, however inoperable, to begin with. A writing, a repetition that offers us another way to understand these network maps. A writing, a repetition that allows us to see that what matters most are not nodes or edges, but rather what lies at the edges, right? So as Nancy argues, interruption occurs at the edge, or rather it constitutes the edge where beings touch each other, expose themselves to each other, and separate from each other, thus communicating and propagating their community. On this edge of exposure, there is passion. And perhaps the network, communication, if it is anything, again, is everything outside those nodes and edges. It's this everything that is nothing communicated, nothing which gets through, which touches us as we hear and write. Thank you.